In this section of the tutorial, we will finish off our basic speed controller, which allows for smooth movement of the player, and we'll see how the use of clock.tick, can then affect and make it much more controllable and much more playable for the user. So what we should have done so far, stage 1, we set up our initialization of the game. We imported the library, we initialized the game, we set up some colors and some coordinates, and more importantly, we used an X and Y speed to be able to control the position and movement of the player. We also created a clock, PyGame.time.clock, and we've called it clock to keep track of it easily. Next, we created our game loop, and inside our game loop, as well as the option of quitting, we have keys to speed us up and slow us down in the horizontal and vertical directions. And we have checked and capped them to prevent us from speeding up or slowing down when we are at the edges of the screen. In addition to this, we also had to add some position game logic. So this is the part of the game where behind the scenes, the player's position is updated before it's drawn on screen. And we had to prevent it going off the edge of the screen, and when it got to the edge of the screen, we had to stop it dead in its tracks by setting the X speed or the Y speed to 0. So if we look at what we have so far, I'm going on to Replit, I'm going into Teams and Birkdale School. I'm continuing working on smooth control stages 1 to 4 because we've only done stages 1 to 3 so far. And what I have so far, if I go to main.py, is this. I've got my game, I've made it 400 by 300 as a size. If I click in that window and then speed up, and you see it's single presses of the key are really moving me very quickly across that very small screen. So this is where the clock is going to help us out with this. So I'm just going to click on stop here. Now if I go to the instructions, you will notice that one of the things is it said we were going to make a red block. So I'm going to change that green to red just to fit in with my code. And also, instead of 1010 here, I should be using size, comma, size, so that we can easily adjust the player size to fit the screen that we've got. Now, we've got our display flip here, and that means it's doing it as fast as it possibly can. But what we can add here is clock.tick brackets 30. And that's giving us a frame rate of 30 frames per second, which is quite fast. Normal animation for television or for film is about 25 frames per second. If I run it now, I've got my red dots appearing, and you can see now a little bit of a press has started to trickle towards that. I can press several times to speed up, but when I get to the edge, it stops in a particular direction. And when I get to the corner, it will stop dead. So one of the things I can do, instead of stopping dead on the edges, I can instead reverse the speed. Instead of here, I've hit an edge, I'm going to stop, I can say X speed equals minus X speed. And the same with this one here. So I've just done it for X, not Y yet, but if I just run that and see what it looks like, click in the window. So I've bounced there at the edge. So it's still, when it hits the top, will not go off or any further there, but it's bouncing backwards and forwards. And if I do the same with the Y speed, instead of Y speed equals 0, Y speed equals minus Y speed, so it reverses and flips it. I do that for both edges. And what I should find now, if I click in this window, is that I have an infinitely bouncing ball. And I can change my X and Y speed to make it bounce at different angles. And it's a reasonably smooth movement. If I was to take this clock tick 30 and make it something really low, like clock tick 5, we'll see what that does to the animation. So you can see that it now looks a bit jerky. So 5 frames per second is not really convincing movement. I think you need at least 12 frames per second for the eye to be fooled. You might want to just keep it down to something like 30 is a reasonable number. And no point in going for absolutely huge numbers because this is running in Replit and it won't be able to match that frame rate. So there are a few other things that we might want to change about our game here. For example, the max width and max height, a standard tiny screen that you might find on a Game Boy or something like that. It might be 480 by 320. So that'd be a more normal size screen for games. The size we might then make proportionately a little bit smaller. We might take it down to something like 6 to make it fit a bit better with our screen. We try that. So it's a much tinier little blob there, and we can then continue to bounce that around. The other thing we could do is that everything has been blocks and rectangles so far. We might change the kind of thing that we're drawing. So we could change that from rect to circle. Now if we try changing to circle and just press run, I think we might run into a problem because the circle is missing a required argument, the radius at position 4. So we need to find out about our shape. So I'm going to go to PyGame here. This is the instructions that are on the docs that are on the internet. I'm going to go to draw and then draw circle to have a look at what that looks like. And draw circle is a surface, a color, a center, and a radius. So what I want to do is I want to have a surface, a color, a center should be X, Y, and I'm going to put that in square brackets. Then it wants to have a size, which will be the radius, and an optional width as well. Let's just try a size of 1. And you can see here that in this window, let me just click off that, in this window here now we've got a circle. And if I was to change that to maybe something like 5, a much thicker circle to the point where it's actually filled in. Maybe try something like 3. It's not so bad. Maybe if I was to go up and change the size here to 20, and then this to about 7, then we end up with a nice thick circle here that we can steer and bounce. And notice it doesn't quite bounce on the edges anymore, and that's because of the way it draws circles. So it's got a 7 pixel gap now. So feel free to play around with some of the numbers that are in here, things like screen size, size of the object, and so on, and see what each of those does.